This is the file interaction activity in JavaScript. I'm going to be doing research as we go, so I've got a web browser open, and we'll basically solve this problem. We'll basically run through the files using as much built-in libraries as we can as a part of JavaScript and Node. Got the README open. First thing we need to do is install the dependencies. So I'll open up a terminal and npm install, or just npm I. We'll run this. That'll install all the packages, and then we can run test, npm run test, to run the test. So we should get 4 failures, and in fact we do. 0 passing, 4 failing, so we're in good shape. Let's go ahead and open up the test. Let's take a look at what's going on here. We have our directory. We're going to be dropping the file. So on the C drive, on our hard drive, there's going to be a temp folder, and in that there's a white belt folder, and in that there's a file interaction folder, and then finally a JavaScript folder. And that's where the files are going to get copied for the test. We've got a before method. This gets run before the tests run. And this is what creates the folders for us and then copies the files out to that folder so that we can make sure we use them as a part of the tests. These are currently failing. I can do them in any order. I'm going to start with the account.json file. This is actually going to go pretty fast in JavaScript because JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So JSON, or JavaScript, deals with JSON files natively. It's got a built-in library, and all we have to do is import that library, import that package for us. So we'll start with this. Let me go to definition here. And all our classes are in one file here, so that'll make it easy. We don't have to do a lot of context switching. And effectively, we need to read and parse a JavaScript file, a JSON file. So let's go ahead and do our internet research real fast. So we'll say, and I'm going to do this in Node. Instead of saying for JavaScript, I'm going to ask specifically for Node because we're running server-side functionality with Node.js. So I'll say no, read and parse JSON file. So here we go. We have basically it's pulling in the FS module, which stands for file system. So this is going to pull in the file. It's going to read it. And then it's using the JSON library to just parse that out. So pretty straightforward, not a whole lot going on. I think that's going to be pretty simple to implement this. So FS and then JSON. So let's head back into our code, do a couple of imports. So we'll import FS from FS, and then similarly we'll import JSON. No, actually we don't need to even import a JSON. I think it's built in natively, so we'll see if I'm correct or not. So from here we'll start by reading our file. And again, going back to the code, we're simply reading that out. So let's say fs.readFile. Now there's a couple of different versions of this. There's readFile that has a callback. I think it's callback. Let's see. Yeah, so this will have a callback, or there is a readFile sync that'll execute it directly. I'm going to do readFile sync just so we don't have to worry about callbacks or promises or anything like that. So we'll just make this very, very simple. We're going to read from the file path. That'll give us back the content. To make sure that this is a string, I will simply pass the encoding as UTF-8, which is Unicode. So this will basically give us back the JSON text from the file. So that's going to read the file, pull that back. From there, we can then parse the object. So we'll say const. So let's open up the file so we can see what this looks like. It's an array that has the objects inside it. So this is going to be our accounts JSON array, is the object that we're going to be parsing out. And so this will be json.parse, and it wants the string, so this is the JSON text. That'll give us back the object, and this object is exactly the objects that we have here. So the first element is going to be an array. Within that, there are going to be a collection of objects. Each has an ID, a name, and a balance property, case sensitive. So the capital I for ID, capital N for name, and capital B for balance. So all I really need to do is convert this into accounts. So we'll create our accounts array. This is what we're going to populate and return. And we'll iterate over the accounts JSON array. So we'll say for const account JSON object of accounts JSON array. So for each one of these things, we're going to extract the values out. So we'll say const ID equals account JSON object.id. So remember, it's the big I because of the property, the way it's displayed in the file. Name and balance. Then we'll create our account, passing ID, name, and balance, and then add that to our accounts. And then finally, we'll return our accounts. Now, there's lots of ways to do this. I could have done filters. I could have done for eaches. There's several different ways to do this, but I'm just doing it very similarly to how I did in the other programming languages so we can see some of the commonalities. So that reads everything through. Now, one of the problems is we don't have a constructor for accounts. So let's go ahead and create our constructor. So take an ID, name, and balance, and we just need to hold on to these. So I've created 3 fields, underscore ID, underscore name, and underscore balance, to hold on to the values as a part of the instance object. So this looks to be about right. Let's see if we've made progress and see if we are now on the write file error. So let's rerun our tests. All right, so we do have a new error. Account.getID is not a function. This is in the reports test file. And this is here. So inside the test, we need to call a getID function. It wants the ID back. So let's create a getID function. GetID. So I'm going to do this as an anonymous function. We could just say function getID as well, or I can do an anonymous function either way. Actually, I don't even need the function keyword because we're in a class. And this will simply return this.id. So that's all we're doing there. Again, let's go back to the test. JSON file, we are on the right data. So that is exactly where we want to be. So we know we're reading the file correctly. So now that we're writing the data, we're ready to write this back out. The reverse of JSON.parse is JSON.stringify. You could do an internet search on that, or you could just look at it through IntelliSense, and sure enough, there it is. So we're going to basically create this object back out. So we're going to create our JSON object we're going to serialize. I could serialize this itself, but the problem is it would be underscores, and I don't want to use underscores there. So we're going to project that out, as well as along with the capital letters, just like we had before with the capital ID, capital name, capital balance. So let's create that object first. So we'll say JSON object equals, and it's just a regular JSON object. We'll say ID is this underscore ID, name is, and these should be colons, this underscore name, and balance is this underscore balance. So there's our object. Now we can stringify that. So we'll say const JSON text equals JSON.stringify given the JSON object. And then finally we're going to write. So fs.write file, and it wants the file as well as the data itself. So the file is going to be the file path, and then the data is JSON text. So that should write it out. Again, let's go back. Let's rerun our test. And we are at 1 passing, 3 failing. Excellent. So we've made progress. We're ready to move on to the next file. So the next one I want to do is, let's just do a CSV file. So in JavaScript, there are libraries for CSV readers, and you can do some internet research on that. I'm going to do this kind of a very simple way, something built in. It's not a built-in CSV reader itself, but I'm simply going to split on the new lines and on the commas. So using the same FS object, I can read the file contents. So let's say const file contents. And while we're doing this, let me go ahead and pull up the customers.txt file so we can review. So we've got our header file, and then we've got our values, the comma separated. We've got ID, name, and balance. So our file contents is fs.readFileSync. I'm going to give it the file path. And again, I'm going to say UTF-8 so it returns it back to us as a string. So we guarantee that it's a string. So we have our file contents. From here, we want to turn this into the lines. So what I'll do is I'll say the lines of the file is file contents.split, and I'm going to split on whack r whack in. Whack r whack in, \r/n. This is the new line character in Windows. This is the carriage return character, and then n is the new line character. So that goes back to typing days, but this is the new line sequence inside Windows files. So that's what we're trying to separate on. So that gives the different lines. Once we have the lines, we want to read through those. We certainly want to skip the first one. We want to read through those and create customer objects. So let's go ahead and create our customers that we're going to return. And let's iterate through those lines. So we'll say for const line of lines. Now I want to skip the first one, so I can call splice1. Splice1 deletes one element from the beginning of the array. So that'll get rid of the first line and then iterate over the rest of them. So we'll skip the first one, splice1. And then for each of these lines, we need to pull the values out. So I'll simply say values equals line.split on comma. That's going to split on the comma values and then give us back an array, which happens to be 3 different values. Now that we've got that, I can pull these values out. So we'll say ID is 0. So that's the first, then name, then starting balance. So const name is values 1, and then const starting balance values 2, not 12. Now that I've got that, I want to create my customer object. So const customer equals new customer, and again we'll pass ID, name, and starting balance. And then finally, add that to our array and return our array. Once again, I need to create a constructor for the customer that takes the ID, name, and starting balance. And we'll simply hold on to these values just like we did before. Now that we've got that, we should be able to run. I am going to check, since I learned on the get ID problem last time. Let's see if we're doing that with customers. And sure enough, we are. So I'm going to need a get ID function as well. Instead of making this a regular function, I'll just make this as an anonymous. So get ID equals a method that returns this.id. So again, let's run our test and make sure that we make some progress. So here we are in write for text file. That's exactly what we want to see. So we're ready to implement the write method. So everything's looking pretty good so far. So to write this back out, we're simply going to recreate our lines and call fs.writeFileSync, just like we did before. So const lines equals, this is a new list or a new array. And lines, we want the first line to be our header row. So I'm going to copy this. So there's our first value. And then our second value is going to be the comma separated values that we have. So I'm going to create an array that is the values to which we were holding. Starting balance. And then I'm going to string join that on comma, and that'll recreate that line for us. Now that we have the lines, we need to join those back to be the text. So file text equals lines.join, and again, \r/n to recreate the new line in Windows. And then finally, fs.writeFileSync. We'll give it the file path and the file text. Let's run our test. We have 2 passing, making progress. So the next problem, we could do the logo image or the transaction file. I'm going to do the transaction file next. Here we're doing XML. Now XML, there's not something built in, so we are going to need to use a library. So let's go ahead and head to our search again. So we'll say node, read, and parse XML file. And while that's pulling up, it pulled it up fairly quickly, but I do want to go ahead and open the transactions XML file for us so we can take a look and see about that. So we're going to be using, it looks like it's got a couple of them. So we could use XML to JS, we could use fast XML parser, or we can use XML DOM, which is just more along the lines of the W3C DOM. I've used a few of these before. I'm going to use XML to JS. It's fairly simple, but it's going to have some complexities. So you're going to watch how we can debug our way through this and figure out what's going on with this library. So we need to install XML to JS. So let's start with that. It's npm I XML to JS. This will install it through npm. Now that we've got that, we can import it into our file. So let's head back to our file here. Let's give us a little bit more room so we can work. So we'll import XML to JS from XML to JS. Now we have that imported, we are ready to use the code. So it's going to create a parser, and then it's going to read the file, and now it's doing the callback. Once it's done, it's going to parse string on the value. Okay, so we're going to need to explore this. We may need to do an async on this one. So here we are. Let's say file contents equals fs.readFileSync from the file path, and again, this is UTF-8. Now that we've got that, we can create our parsers. Const parser equals new XML to JS parser. And parser.parse, so we can parse string or parse string promise. Interesting. So parse string has a callback. So CB question mark, that's generally a callback, and it's either going to give us an error or result. It's going to work asynchronously. It's not going to work well for what we want. In our case, we're probably going to want the parse string with a promise, so we're going to need to await this. So this will end up being the XML. So this is actually the root element, so we'll call it the XML document, or just document equals parser.parse. We're going to await that. Let's give it the file contents. Now, because we're using await, we need to make this an async method. And because we're making this an async method, we have to propagate up. This is the problem with async, is that it forces us to propagate things all the way up the stack. So read file contents for transactions. There we go. Read file contents. We're going to need to await this, which means this method also needs to be async. So that's the problem with async and await, is once you do one, everything above it also has to be async with awaits. So it can cause some kind of ugly changes that you have to do inside your code. I'm not a huge fan of the way that was implemented, but it is what it is. Now that we've got our document, we need to figure out how to parse this out. Now, the problem is the example didn't really give us much. So I could do some more internet searches. However, I'm going to simply log this out. Let's see what this document looks like as we run the code. So we'll head back to our test. And now that we've got this, I'm going to scroll up. Here is, right above the picture of my face, here is the object. Oh, help me out here. Here we go. So we've got an object, we see the curly braces, and inside that there's a transactions property. So I'm going to leave this up. let's scroll down just a little bit, leave this up. So inside here, inside this document object, there is a transactions property. That is an object that also has a transaction property, which is an array of the objects. So that will give us our array. So this, let's call this the transaction element. Yeah, let's just call it elements. And now, let's log that out. That'll be an array. I want to see each one. Let's iterate over that. So let's say for const transaction element of transaction elements, we're going to console.log the transaction element. So now let's see what these individual objects looks like. We'll run our test again, scroll back up, and here are the values. So inside here, the object, there is a dollar property. Interesting. So the dollar property is an object that has an ID property that's the ID attribute. In addition to the dollar property, it's got a date property that's an array of the values and an amount that is an array of the values. So this is a very interesting structure, not what I would have guessed. That's okay, we can pull these values out. We'll say const ID equals transaction element, and we need the dollar. So I can't just do dollar, that's not gonna work very well because it's a special character, but arrays in JavaScript, or objects in JavaScript, are associative arrays, which means not only can you do .id, you could also do square bracket quote ID. Those do the exact same thing. So in our case, we'll simply do dollar. That'll get us the object, and then from there we can get the ID. That'll get us the value of the ID property. So there's our ID. The next is going to be the date. So again, the transaction element. This is going to be from the date property, and that's an array, and we want the only element in it. It's an array that has a single element, that's the date value. We'll do the same thing on amount. There's our values. Now we'll say const transaction. Oops. Is a new transaction. And again, give it the values. We'll hold on to it just like we did with the other classes. And then transactions. So we're going to need to create our array. And then return that at the end. Now we do need our constructor. ID, date, and amount. And then our get ID again, and I'll do this one again as a function. We'll go back and forth on these. Let's rerun our test. And inside the XML, we are ready for the right data. So looking better, looking good, looking good. So now here we are, we want to do the right functionality. Let's see what we've got here. So node write. We can use the XML to JS again. That's for reading. Right, XML file. These are not the values I want. All right, well, we'll figure this out as we go. So what I'll do instead is I'm going to just recreate this, and I'm going to use string formatting to basically recreate this transaction element here. So let's go back, and what we're going to do is say const, this will be the XML text equals, and I'm going to use the backticks for placeholders. So this is going to be our XML file. Start with the XML declaration. And then we'll have our transaction element, and then we need to close the transaction element. In here, we're going to have the ID equals, and this is going to be the value from this underscore ID. And then indenting, we've got a date. This will be the value from this underscore date. And then finally, amount. This underscore amount. So there's our XML text, and all we really need to do, we've got the text itself, let's just write it out. So we'll do fs.write file sync, give it the file path along with the XML text. Let's see if this works. 3 passing, we're on to the last one. So the last one is our logo image, and like the other languages, this is the most simple. All we need to do is read the file contents, save them off, hold on to them, and then use them to write the file again. So we'll simply do fs.read file. This is going to take the file path, and that's going to give our file contents. So we'll say file contents equals, and then we just return a new logo image, a single image in this case, with the file contents. Create our constructor. Hold on to the file contents. And I'm going to go ahead and just finish this up because I think this is going to work. So we'll write this back out, write file contents to the file path, and we're writing the file contents. So that is the least amount of code. Let's rerun all the tests. We have 4 passing tests. That concludes our file interaction activity in JavaScript.